In the previous lesson, we created a form in the Add Item HTML template, which allows users to add to-do items to the database. This works perfectly fine, but creating forms manually leaves our application open to errors if we don't validate them properly. For example, if we create a form and forget to mark one of the fields as required, but that field is required on the database model, Django would try to create an item in our database with a missing field, which could result in an error on the front end. To alleviate this issue, in Django it's possible to create forms directly from the model itself and allow Django to handle all the form validation. To make this happen, we need to create a new file in the to-do app directory called forms.py. Inside the forms.py file, we need two things. First, from Django, we need to import forms, which will allow us to leverage some of the built-in Django form functionality. And secondly, we need our item model. Just like when we created the item model itself, our form will be a class that inherits a built-in Django class to give it some basic functionality. To set it up, we need to create a new class, I'll call mine item form, and it's going to inherit all the functionality of forms.modelForm. To tell the form which model it's going to be associated with, we need to provide an inner class called meta. This inner class just gives our form some information about itself, like which fields it should render, how it should display error messages, and so on. In this class, the only thing I'm going to define are model, which is going to be our item model, and fields, which will tell it we want to display the name and done fields from the model. The idea of creating this form in Django is that rather than writing an entire form ourselves in HTML, we can simply render it out as a template variable. To make sure we've got it available for use in the template, let's head to views.py and import the item form. With the form imported, we can now create an instance of it in the Add Item view, create a context which contains the empty form, and then return the context to the template. This means that in the Add Item template, we can now go delete all the fields we created ourselves and instead render the form just like we would any other template variable. Loading the page now will show us that our new form renders just fine, but if you try to add a new item, you'll see that we get an integrity error. Django is telling us that the not null constraint on the name field failed when trying to create an item. In other words, we set null equals false on the model to indicate we wanted the name to be required, but we're trying to create an item without a name. The reason we're seeing this error is that we've deleted the name and done fields we created ourselves and are instead using the Django form, but the view is still looking for the old fields we made ourselves. To fix it and finalize the functionality, let's go back to the Add Item view. Here in the request.post handler, instead of trying to create the item manually, let's let our new form from forms.py do it. To do that, we can use a similar syntax to what we used to create the empty form, but instead here we'll populate the form in Django with the request.post data. Then we can simply call the isValid method on the form, and Django will automatically compare the data submitted in the post request to the data required on the model and make sure everything matches up. To save our item then, all we need to do is call form.save and then redirect to the getToDoList view like we were before. If you go back to the Add Item page now, you'll see the form works as expected. You probably noticed that when we removed our own form elements, we lost the vertical layout. To get that back, Django forms actually have a number of built-in methods we can use in the template, such as asP, which will render the fields as paragraphs, and asTable, which will render them as a table. I'll use asP here to get our vertical styling back. With our Django form functional, let's now move on to the next element of CRUD, updating or editing items.